How many nomophobes in the room? How many of you have no idea what I just said? That's what I thought. Noma Phobia is not an actual clinical disorder, thank God, but it was coined back in 2008 to describe the roughly 2/3 of us who are literally terrified of being without our mobile device. You might find yourself in this category. You get the shakes, start to breathe a little heavier, fight or flight response kicks in, but it's about 2/3 of the population. If you lose your mobile phone and you are a human being with your personal contacts and your personal pictures and everything else on it, that's devastating, yes? But if you are a company and that mobile phone now has company information on it or access to company information, it is a whole different ballgame, right? How many of you have heard of Symantec's Honey Stick project? You got to Google that one. The Honey Stick project is an awesome project. What Symantec did was they, quote unquote, lost 50 cell phones in 5 markets. These cell phones were pre-populated with lots of corporate data that you could easily just go in and log in with pre-populated passwords. They also had the owner's information available on the device so you could easily return it. What they found is that in 80% of the cases, someone attempted to access a corporate network via one of those devices. And they found that we're not as good Samaritan as we might think we are, because in only about half the cases was the phone ever attempted to be returned to its rightful owner. So for companies struggling with this, this is a huge issue, right? And dutiful as we are as employees, when we do lose our mobile device, we report it immediately to IT, right? No, because we know they're just going to wipe it or they're going to do something else, so we hold on to that knowledge for a little bit thinking we'll find it ourselves, exposing the corporation to even more risk. I'm not going to belabor the bring your own device trend because it's more than a trend, it's a reality, it is here. But what is interesting about the bring your own device trend is that it's fundamentally reestablishing the relationship between employer and employee. I had an interesting debate with one of our attorneys not that long ago. I pulled out my smartphone and I said, who owns the contacts on this smartphone? And she said, well, we do. Alcatel-Lucent does. I said, really? I said, because I got those contacts on my own by going to events. Yeah, but we paid for you to go to those events. I said, did you? I said, did you pay for me to go and socialize afterwards with colleagues I had met? That I put those contacts in my phone of my own volition? Did you pay for that too? Well, no, but we paid for the phone. I said, did you? Because I happened to bring this phone in on my own. I paid for the phone. So who owns what on the phone? And you can see a very interesting debate that's emerging around what's mine versus what's yours if I'm your employee and you're my employer. One thing that I stress about big data is the big labor shortage we are about to experience in this country. McKinsey estimates that in the next 5 years, we're going to be short some 1.5 million managers and employees who are capable of using that human interaction that we heard just earlier and understanding and interpreting the data, making it actionable, making it relevant, and doing something ethical with it. I'll give you some examples of how you can take big data and come to some pretty erroneous conclusions. You might not know this, but shark attacks and ice cream are highly correlated events. So clearly sharks have a penchant for ice cream like we do. No, they just both happen to happen during the seasonal months. Another one, kids with really extensive vocabularies happen to have a lot of cavities. So obviously the really smart, brainy kids in class must love candy, right? Natural conclusion would be false. Has to do with the age of the kid in question, nothing to do with external environment. You get my point. These are pretty obvious things that you could look at and go, those two, correlation does not imply causation there. But when you're dealing with massive volumes of data and you have a skill deficit hitting this nation, that becomes much trickier to navigate, right? IT alone will never yield you sustainable competitive advantage. But IT as a means towards enabling culture, which is what all these technologies can enable, culture actually does yield sustainable competitive advantage. That's been proven by companies like the Great Place to Work Institute that has measured things like company culture since 1980 and have really determined in a quantifiable way that culture, as squishy as that is, actually does yield you competitive advantage. If you don't think it does, Just ask Goldman Sachs after last year, the New York Times op-ed piece by Greg Smith, why I am leaving Goldman Sachs, where he in 1,000 words basically excoriated his former employer and said it was due to their culture. The next day, Goldman Sachs suffered a $2 billion hit in valuation. By my calculations, it's about, $2 million a word? Not too bad for Greg Smith. And what we find is that if culture builds advantage, guess what builds culture? Trust.